The golden rays of the morning sun filtered through the ornate windows of Queen Nazima's private chambers, casting intricate patterns across the marble floor where she knelt in prayer. 7 years had passed since she had ascended to the throne beside King Aminu. 7 years of prosperity and progress for the Sokoto Caliphate. Yet, as she whispered her morning supplications, a shadow of unease had begun to settle over her heart like dust on a neglected room. She had felt the change in recent months, the way conversation ceased when she entered rooms, the sideways glances from court officials, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that reminded her too painfully of her childhood, when she had learned to recognize the signs of impending betrayal. "My queen," came the gentle voice of Hawa, her most trusted lady-in-waiting, the only person in the palace who had known her story from the beginning. "The council awaits your presence." Nazima rose gracefully, adjusting her silk wrapper and ensuring her gold crown sat perfectly atop her elegantly braided hair. She had learned that every gesture, every expression was scrutinized by those who still questioned whether a former slave deserved to wear the crown. But she had also learned that dignity was her greatest armor. As she walked through the palace corridors, her bare feet silent on the cold stone, she noticed how the servants' eyes no longer met hers with the same warmth. The palace that had become her sanctuary now felt like a battlefield where she fought daily to prove her worthiness. The council chamber fell silent as she entered, the dozen noblemen rising in obligatory respect. But Nazima had developed an acute sensitivity to the quality of silence, and this one thrummed with hostility barely contained beneath the veneer of courtesy. "Your Majesty," said Alhaji Musa, the king's eldest advisor, and a man whose disdain for her had never been fully concealed, "we have matters of great importance to discuss regarding the kingdom's direction." King Aminu sat at the head of the long wooden table, his usually warm eyes clouded with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment their eyes met and she saw something that made her blood run cold. Doubt. After 7 years of marriage, 7 years of shared dreams and whispered promises, she saw doubt in her husband's eyes. "Speak freely," Nazima said, taking her place at the table with the same composed grace that had once impressed Prince Aminu at a palace feast so many years ago. Alhaji Musa cleared his throat, his weathered face bearing the satisfied expression of a man about to deliver a carefully planned blow. "Your Majesty, disturbing information has come to our attention. Information that calls into question not only your past, but your suitability to rule over our people." The words hit her like physical blows, but Nazima's face remained serene. She had survived worse than words, survived the breaking of her spirit and the rebuilding of her soul. But the pain that lanced through her now was different. This wasn't the cruelty of strangers, but the betrayal of those she had served faithfully. "Continue," she said simply. Another council member, Malam Gaba, leaned forward with predatory eagerness. "We have received testimony from traders who knew you during your previous circumstances. They speak of questionable behavior, of moral compromises that would be unseemly for a queen. The lies were crafted with surgical precision, designed to wound where she was most vulnerable." Nazima felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, of being trapped with no escape. But this time the cage was made not of physical chains, but of whispered accusations and poisoned reputations. "These traders," Nazima said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "Do they have names? Do they present evidence beyond their words?" "Your Majesty," Alhaji Musa interjected smoothly, "surely you understand that when the honor of the throne is at stake, we must investigate every claim, no matter how painful it might be for all involved." She looked around the table, seeing the faces of men she had worked alongside, men whose counsel she had sought, men whose children she had blessed at naming ceremonies. Now they looked at her like vultures circling wounded prey, their eyes bright with the anticipation of her downfall. "And what do you propose?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "A period of reflection," said Malam Gaba. "Perhaps you could withdraw from court duties while we conduct a thorough investigation. For the good of the kingdom, you understand." The silence that followed was deafening. Nazima felt the weight of 7 years crashing down upon her. 7 years of proving herself, of building schools and hospitals, of bringing prosperity to a kingdom that had accepted her with reluctant grace. All of it threatened to crumble because a group of men had decided that a former slave could never truly be their queen. But what shattered her heart was not their betrayal. She had expected that, had steeled herself for it from the day she first wore a crown. What destroyed her was the continued silence from the head of the table, from the man who had once promised that her past would never define their future. "My king," she said, her voice buried above a whisper, "what say you to these accusations?" King Aminu's struggle was visible on his face, the war between love and political expediency playing out in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully chosen, diplomatically neutral, and more devastating than any outright condemnation could have been. "My queen, perhaps it would be wise to address these concerns thoroughly, for the stability of the realm." The betrayal cut deeper than Zainab's had all those years ago. Zainab had been motivated by greed and had never pretended to love her, but Aminu had held her through nightmares about her past, had sworn that they would face any challenge together. Now, when she needed him most, he chose political safety over the woman who had stood by his side through 7 years of rule. Nazima rose from her chair with the same grace she had maintained throughout the ordeal. "I see," she said simply, "then I shall withdraw to my chambers while you conduct your investigation." As she turned to leave, Alhaji Musa's voice stopped her. "Your Majesty, there is one more matter. Given the sensitivity of the situation, we think it best if Prince Yusuf and Princess Amina remain under the care of their tutors for now. To avoid any confusion, they were taking her children, the two bright lights of her life, the proof that she had transcended her past and built something beautiful. They were taking them from her." The composed mask she had worn throughout the meeting finally cracked. "They are my children," she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain strong. "They are the kingdom's children," Malam Garba replied coldly, "and we must protect them from any scandal that might arise from these investigations." Nazima felt herself fragmenting, the carefully constructed persona of the unshakable queen crumbling like a wall under siege. But even as her world collapsed around her, she managed to maintain her dignity as she left the chamber, her head held high despite the tears that threatened to fall. In the corridor, Hawa waited with tears streaming down her face. The loyal woman fell into step beside her queen, her silence more comforting than any words could have been. They walked together through the palace that had been home, past the rooms where Nazima had held court, past the gardens where her children played, past the chambers where she had dreamed of a future that now seemed impossible. That night, alone in her chambers with only Hawa for company, Nazima finally allowed herself to weep. She cried for the girl who had been sold by her stepmother, for the woman who had dared to dream of acceptance, and for the queen who had forgotten that some battles are never truly won. "My lady," Hawa whispered, holding her as she had on so many nights, when nightmares of her past haunted her sleep. "What will you do?" Through her tears, Nazima looked out the window at the kingdom she had served with everything she had. Somewhere in the palace, her children slept, unaware that their mother had been branded with shame once again. Somewhere, her husband wrestled with the choice between love and crown. And somewhere, men who had never known true hardship congratulated themselves on removing a queen they deemed unworthy. "I will remember who I am," Nazima said finally, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am the daughter of a man who told me I had royal blood. I am the woman who survived slavery and rose to wear a crown. I am the queen who built schools and brought peace to this land." She stood wiping away her tears and walked to the window that overlooked her kingdom. The moon cast silver light over the land she had helped to prosper, over the people she had served with devotion. "They think they can break me with whispers and accusations," she continued, her voice now carrying the steel that had seen her through the darkest moments of her life. They think that because I was once a slave, I will always be weak. But they have forgotten something important. What is that, my lady? Hawa asked. Nazima turned from the window, her eyes blazing with the fire that had never been extinguished. Not by Zainab's cruelty, not by years of bondage, and not by the conspiracies of small men. I have already survived the worst they can do to me, and queens who have walked through fire do not burn easily. Outside her window, the kingdom slept peacefully, unaware that their queen was preparing for the fight of her life, not just for her crown, but for her children, her dignity, and the right of every person who had ever been deemed unworthy to rise above the circumstances of their birth. The conspiracy against Queen Nazima had succeeded in cornering her, but they had made a crucial miscalculation. They had forgotten that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest flames, and their former slave queen had been forged in fires they could never imagine.